All right. With a few clicks or presses of buttons, the time-space continuum has been bridged. Here we are. This is J Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is J Brown. Welcome to you, whoever you are. Are you new to the show today? If so, I'm Jay. Nice to meet you. Welcome. Everyone else, what's up? How is it where you are in this moment that you're listening? For me, it is gray and raining outside, but not in a dreary way. I don't know, maybe it's just my mood and how I'm feeling today, but it doesn't feel dreary, even though it looks that way. It feels melancholic in a romantic way that I'm enjoying, in a way that feels like there's joy even in the acknowledgement of the tragedies and difficulties that we have. That there's the thread of joy that runs through it. So for whatever that's worth, I hope you're feeling a thread of joy regardless of how screwed up everything might be. And listen, I am determined to keep this introduction as short as possible. The reason being that my talk today with Paul JJ Alix is lengthy and I want to get right to it. And there's not really much that needs to be said, I don't think. Let me just set up the conversation for you, though. I mentioned this to Paul at the beginning, but maybe a little bit more setup is a good idea because this conversation came out of nowhere, really. You see, Paul JJ Alix is a name that is just burned into my brain, even though I had never met Paul before. There was a moment, and I mentioned this to him, that I was at Leslie Kaminoff's studio, The Breathing Project, and there was a card that said Yoga for All with Paul JJ Alix. And on the card, I can't remember exactly what the words were, but it basically said that he taught like in the tradition of TKV Desichackar, and that it was one-to-one instruction only. You know, it was someone who was teaching the principles of yoga that I was most inspired by in a very, in my mind, kind of pure way, because I was trying to take those principles and bring them into vinyasa yoga classes. And I eventually like opened his yoga center, and it was like all about that. It was all about bringing the principles of one-to-one personal practice into the group vinyasa yoga class context. And then here was someone else who was sort of doing the exact opposite. And I had always thought I would want to like go meet him or practice with him, but I never did. And then he sort of disappeared and never really saw or heard of him since. Like once everything went online, I just don't have any other memories of him being online or I don't know, having any interaction with him when I was doing the blog and all the early internet stuff. But not too long ago, I was on Twitter. I think it was still Twitter because it was months ago. I can't remember it had made its transition, but I was on Twitter, and all along my feed was a comment about, I can't remember what, but Paul JJ Alix. And the name was like, what? And I clicked, and sure enough, it was him. But there's like almost nothing about him on the internet. So I DM'd him, and I, just gave him my stock invitation. I'm always interested in talking to people who met TKV Desichackar or studied with him or taught in his tradition. And I just had this memory of him and I wanted to meet him. And that was months ago. Like, I don't remember how many months ago, but like maybe at least 6 months ago. It was a while back that I sent that message. I never heard from him. And then out of nowhere, all of a sudden popped up, he scheduled a time for us. And, he emailed me, we had an email exchange, and he'd been listening to the show. And I don't want to say anymore. I'll let you listen. It felt significant to finally get a chance to meet and hear from him. And I'm glad to be able to share it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, if you are enjoying what you're getting from this show and you want to connect with me in other ways, there's lots of opportunities for us to do that. There's ongoing live classes. There's a weekly discussion group. There's my new on-demand video course, which I'm encouraging you to go check out, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And you can find all of it at jbrownyoga.com. All right. I don't know how I did. I tried to keep it as tight as I could. I will touch base with you on the other side for just a moment. But let's go ahead and get to it, all right? Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Paul JJ Alix. Hello?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard of you.
You. And I know you've listened to this show before, so just to say, I'm already recording. Please, let's consider ourselves having just begun.
Okay.
All right, good. Well, Paul, it's funny that that's what you said to me, that you heard my name, because I've heard your name. And the reason why I know your name is because I saw a palm card of yours at the Breathing Project. Maybe it was, 2003, 2004. And it said, Yoga for All, Paul JJ Alix. And I don't remember exactly what it said from there, but I remember what the message was, is that you taught one-to-one, individualized yoga in the spirit of TKV Desichackar. And that was it. There was no group classes. It was just one-to-one. And I, at that time, was at a crossroads, maybe the first crossroads that I was in my yoga path, where I had studied all these different styles and yoga was really booming. You could literally open a storefront and put out a sign and the classes were selling out, And the popular style was the power style, that it had just kind of started to, Ashtanga had sort of taken over in a way. And Leslie opened with Zach Kurland the Breathing Project specifically to have a place for people who wanted to teach in the spirit of Desichackar. And I was really kind of facing this dilemma of, can you teach the principles that Desichackar teaches in group classes? There was a bit of a debate about that. It could only really be done one-to-one because it's this interpersonal exchange, essentially, of sorts. So in any case, at that moment, I kind of set a directive for myself, which I've still been on, very much so, was to see if I could bring those sort of principles into group class settings. And you represent to me kind of a purity of sticking to it and not teaching in group classes. Now, maybe that's incorrect. I don't know, but that's what I associate you with, which is a very old school, authentic teaching that kind of got overshadowed by all this commercialization and stuff. Now, I don't know how any of that sounds to you, but I guess my first question would be do I have that right? Did you only teach one-to-one, or did you also teach group classes at yoga centers?
Well, I taught group classes quite often, probably all the time.
I see.
And I had classes at my studio in New York. I was just listening to Carl Horowitz yesterday. So
Carl, yes, he was around at that time too, wasn't he?
Well, he taught in my studio. Okay. He's one of my fond memories of teachers and things like that. and of New York,
I see.
And so your podcast is it's the pinnacle.
Oh, I love that. You've been having fun listening, because a lot of those people. I'm sure you know all those folks.
In fact, the only problem is that there's this, we always think silly things every once in a while. And the silly thing that came to my mind is, we should just have this podcast next year because I have to listen to all the podcasts first.
No, you could come back again next year. It'll be fine.
I don't know. It's like a party. It's like a reunion.
I think it's long overdue that you're here. So let me because I always try to do some preparation before these talks and see if I could get some bio info. I can't find anything about you online. You have
I was thinking about that. I thought
you have a super low digital profile, and
he has to look. He's doing research for the podcast. He has to be looking.
That's why I don't know. That's why I can't. I didn't know you had a studio. I didn't know Carl talked to you. All I know is that palm card. That palm card that said "Yoga for All." I
don't even know what a palm card is.
It was like a little piece of. Like a palm card, like a postcard with one side that you would put your number on, like a business card almost, but bigger than that little one. In
2004,
something like that. Yeah,
I was in the Breathing Project. Okay,
Leslie must have put them out, or Carl must have put them out. But they were for you personally. It didn't seem like it was to your studio. I don't know. Maybe I got that wrong. I don't know. That's what I remember. I remember you being someone who was certainly teaching kind of in the Desichackar style. Is that right? Were you teaching in lots of different styles, or were you mainly teaching Desichackar stuff?
No, just Desichackar mixed with whatever other things I had to come with.
Did your yoga start with Desichackar, or did you first start yoga at some other kind of approach or tradition?
Oh no, I had a much longer past than that. But what I was saying earlier, that I just wanted to finish that, and that is that you're looking for me on the internet, and I thought it's so beautiful. It's the most perfect way for you to start the podcast with me, is that you can't find anything because I don't exist, in a way, And one of the things one of the things I thought I should put out there, and I thought, should I say it? Is he going to get the wrong idea? Is it going to sound bad? But
go. I want you to say whatever it is, whatever that is. I'd like for you to say it.
Yeah, I'm going to say it, and that's part of it too. Is that I'm pre-canceled. Okay, we have this cancel culture in our society. And I come to you on this podcast already pre-canceled. There is nothing I'm afraid to talk about. There's nothing I'm afraid to say. You can call me any name you want to. I'm sick of this anti-Semitic stuff and what's going on in Israel right now, and that they're killing all these people is just making me sick. And I don't care, because I started listening to your first podcast, and you had some guy said some joke about he's a Jewish, and he made some joke, and then he said, and then you guys started talking about it, became a big thing, and you said, well, I better apologize. I'm not apologizing for anything if I don't do anything. And he didn't do anything, and yet he still apologized. So I come pre-cancel, because I don't care who's listening. You cannot cancel me, because I'm already done. I've already canceled myself. I'm a hermit.
Wow.
Okay.
Wait a second. Let me say something about that. First of all, it's so interesting that that's what you wanted to lead with, because last night I had this teachers group that I do each week. And we had this very intense conversation about feeling like you can't say what you really think anymore. And over the holidays, and how there used to be people in my life who I could have real open inquiry with. I could ask certain things or not believe certain things, and it would be okay. And it doesn't feel like that anymore.
No, they're controlling you.
I guess for me, I really do appreciate that you've come like that. And I also do appreciate that there's nothing about you online that I can't find anything for you online. I'm sitting here with a blank piece of paper. I have no notes because I had nothing to take notes on. And that means that I have to be right here with you now, which is also something we've been talking a lot about, kind of improvisatory space. And that has always been my idea for the show too, that let's be off script. Let's really have a conversation like you and I are just getting together to have a tea and meeting each other for the first time, which is as close as we could come, not living in the same place right now.
That's what I love about your podcast. It's nectar.
Well, okay. Well, listen, before I'm happy to go to some of the places that you just pointed to, and I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous about that because I've definitely been kind of a stance these days where I don't need to talk about certain things because it does cause so much conflict. I'm trying not to feed the polarization and to like find ways to be with people and find bridges. But I also feel like there's things happening that aren't being said that is really upsetting. So I get where you're coming from for sure. But before we get into like that hairiness, I do want to spend a little time on like yoga stuff with you because the fact that you referred to yourself just now as a bit of a hermit, that's been my impression too. And you know, you were there at that first time when yoga was booming. And I am curious about the choices that you made, or as much as you would want to share about them, because I think it's interesting to map those trajectories that people had, because some people kind of rode the wave and some people flew under the radar. And then like yourself I don't know, did you ever do like yoga journal conferences and kind of get into the yoga world like that? Or were you always skeptical of it?
Oh, no. I was never skeptical. Necessarily. I didn't attend those things. I think I don't have yoga journal. Never. Before that, I think there was some other kind of thing that was before yoga journal. Yoga things that were going on that they were new and then they became yoga journal, I think. And I attended one of those. And it was kind of fun for me. And that's where I met Yogi Bhajan. And I thought, oh, he's a powerful talker, orator. He was good.
See.
And I enjoyed his talk. And then I enjoyed hearing about the Yogi Bhajan from, when you first asked me, it came on around that time, right after Leslie. I mean, not after Leslie, after Gary Kraftsour or something like that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I didn't know anything. I mean, I'm so outside I've like excommunicated myself from the yoga community.
That's
basically.
what I mean. Like, when did that happen? Because you were in the yoga community back when I first saw your name, it seemed like. Carl was teaching at your place. You had a center in Manhattan, you said?
Yeah, but I got tired of it because I kind of, this is one of the things that I'm coming into a danger zone here right now. But I see the way, and I'm probably wrong, and you might correct my vision, you see, because I don't hang around with that many yogis, and so my idea of the yoga world is that it's Ukraine flag flying, vaccine shaming Hillary Clinton voters, supporters, and it's the way I see it. And it's like I don't belong in that world.
I don't think that's the yoga world. I mean, there might be a big portion of the yoga world that's like that.
Well, when I was on Facebook back during the election in 2016, everybody was going nuts about Hillary
at 2016 on Facebook. Yes, I think you might have been right. That's true.
That's when I shut off Facebook and I said I can't deal with this anymore. I don't want to be on Facebook, and so I left.
Yeah.
And I was just, everybody's talking about Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton like she was some kind of goddess or something, And I'm like, this is nuts.
I know. I was living in New York, and I had been a registered independent my whole life, and I changed my registration so I could vote in the primary for Bernie. And then they did this thing where they changed the date. I had registered within the date to be able to do it, and then they changed it, and I was disenfranchised and I couldn't vote. And I was like, fuck that. I was so mad.
Well, they're doing things. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's really happening. And as a humanity, we're in a serious position right now.
I know. But I want to talk about the yoga with you first, because what are your feeling about yoga? Let's forget about the yoga world and Facebook and all of that shit. Like, just on a personal level, okay? Did you meet Desichackar?
I thought I should get that over with. Did I meet
I appreciate, we're not done with that. We can go back there, but what I want to do is I want to meet that stuff also in the context of my yoga, because that's the only way I'm able to that's the vehicle I have to kind of work through what's happening,
Yeah. Do yoga?
Yeah.
You better have that vehicle.
That's what I'm saying. So let's talk about that for a bit. So did you meet Desichackar?
Did I meet him? I mean, I spent time with him.
Okay, when did that happen? You said you had a longer time in yoga. What was the yoga you did before Desichackar?
Okay, you go way back. I figured you want to know these things, and it's kind of fun. And we like talking about ourselves. But I know
that's weird, but here's why. It's not just to talk about ourselves. It's because you came into yoga at a different time than most of the people going to listen to this. And you're like the generation just before me. And I'm kind of like a bridge between you and more where people are now, although I know I might be too old now. But you know what I'm saying? So like for me, part of the show has always been like an oral history. So that's why I'm asking you.
I know. And I love it. I mean, just listening to these people and telling things like I listened to Mark Whitwell, I don't know, yesterday or something. And it was just like, oh, I didn't know all these things about Mark Whitwell. He stayed in my apartment when he was writing the book. That was probably when you met him.
Wow.
Is when he stayed in my apartment. He was in my apartment when you met him.
Wow. That's pretty wild, actually, that would be the case, that he was in your... There's a good chance that that's true.
No, it's probably true, because he came to my apartment. Okay, when he came to my apartment, it was the very first time he had come from India, and he was in India for a long time. And he had just arrived, and he was trying to get his book published. And he was talking about that, and that's when you met him, from what I understood.
That's true. Wow, crazy. All right, well... Talk to me about your yoga.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just jazzed about people's histories and stuff. So, okay, let somebody get jazzed about mine, I guess.
Please, I am. Go ahead, please.
So, I like Mark Whitwell. I started with Be Here Now in a way. I mean, I can't say it's not the first thing I read or anything, but I mean, it was one of the first books that really made a big impression on me. Mm-hmm. And my mind was just driven toward these books on yoga and whatever it was, anything that was connected to that kind of thing, esoterical or whatever it was there. I was drawn to it, and yoga became a big thing in my mind. And I thought, I got to do this, And so I went to college, and there was a lecture that was going to be on yoga, meditation, and all this, So I'm going to that. And so I went to that lecture, and the fellow talked about all these things, and I was just like jazzed, and I thought, okay. And then at the end of the lecture, he said, anybody who's interested, I'll initiate you into meditation. Just come and meet me. So I went, and I don't even know if there was anyone else. I mean, there wasn't that many. I mean, there were a lot of people at the lecture, but not many people came, and I might have been the only one, but I probably wasn't, because it's so long ago. I can remember meeting him. That's vision, it's pure in my mind, but I don't remember if anybody else, because I didn't care about anybody else, And so he told me, okay, this is your mantra, and now you practice 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, and you sit in lotus, and you do this mantra, and that's it. And that's all I knew. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know where he came from. It's in India, but I mean, I didn't know anything else. And I didn't know there was anything more to learn.
Do you remember the mantra that he gave you?
Yeah.
You don't have to share it. I know that's personal stuff. Don't have to share it.
Well, it's a funny thing, because it turned out to be a practice mantra, but I didn't know that. And so I just did this meditation. He told me you do 1 hour in the morning in this mantra, and you do 1 hour. So I had my mother's egg timer, I remember when I was at my house in Chicago, and I went back, and I would have my mother's egg timer, and I'd turn it to 1 hour, and I'd sit there for 1 hour and meditate. And the thing would be ticking,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it goes bing, And anyway, I trained myself to do 1 hour. And then that was totally against what Desichackar would do. But that made me really happy when I found out that Desichackar would say, do 5 minutes and then we'll expand it to 6 minutes and then we'll make it. I would have never survived that. But 1 hour was what I needed. And it was hard as it was, I just did it. And so I started trying to figure out who this guy was. And then I found out that there was a group of people and they were doing meditations and things like that. And there was yoga going on and you could find a group of people. So I found this group of people in Chicago. And that's where I was at the time. And there was this Indian fellow, he was married. He was doing a meditation once a week, a group meditation. And I think that's the way you learn meditation. I think in a group with somebody who's really good. And I think.
And was it like guided meditations or were you just sitting?
No, we already knew how to meditate. Like I'd already been doing for a couple of years. It's silent mantra meditation.
Right.
And so, but now he's a married Indian man with an Indian wife and Indian kids in a little apartment. And we would close off the living room and there would be these, if you can imagine, 2 big double doors. And then there's a hallway going out there that goes and it goes right past the double doors from the front door and then goes back to the bedrooms and all that kind of stuff. So the kids didn't have very much place to play. So they would be in the hallway can you imagine, those tricycles with plastic?
I have 2 children. Believe me, I can't imagine.
Okay, so imagine that. And we would have this meditation for an hour or whatever. Like that was typical, I guess. And so while we're meditating, the kids would be riding up and down the hallway, screaming and banging into the walls with their plastic tricycles, those little plastic tricycle things. And they just be banging into the wall and into the stairs or whatever. And they scream. And the wife was taking care of them while we were meditating. And she didn't tell them to be quiet or anything, which I didn't care. Right. I didn't question this. I sat there with these meditations with this noise going on. And so that was what it was. And then I started having community. I started having people that, there's all this stuff to learn. There's yamas and niyamas and all these kind of things, Oh, okay. And so.
And this is in living rooms in Chicago, right?
Yeah. And with these kids.
Yeah. In the railroad apartments. I get it.
And it didn't faze me. And then I found out that was the best meditation training you could possibly get.
Yeah.
I could meditate anywhere. Right. I could just anywhere. I could just sit down in the middle of the park. And I did when I was traveling Europe and everything. I was in Europe for years. I would just, if I took a train somewhere and I arrived somewhere, I'd usually look for a church because there's nobody ever in church. And so I'd go to the churches and they were always, Gothic cathedrals and things like that. And they were always fascinating anyway. And now I'd go in the church and I'd sit and there'd be nobody there and I'd meditate, and that was always my go-to place. But if I didn't find I'd sit in the park. And I was in Yugoslavia once and I'm sitting in the park, Yugoslavia. If you could you can't even imagine. And that's before the war. It's before the war. It was still Yugoslavia. And I'm like, I want to do my noon meditation or something. I don't know what it was. Maybe it's morning. I don't remember. But I was like, I'm going to do meditation. I'm in this big park. And I thought, okay, I'll go to the middle of the park where there's nobody. Everybody's on the edges or something. I'll go in the middle here and I'll just sit down and do my meditation. I don't care. Nothing phases me. When I'm in meditation, you cannot disturb me. And so I sat in meditation and I'm sitting there in meditation. I'm finishing my hour and I'm getting close to the end. And I started to, when I'm meditating, I can kind of know what's going on around me. Like some people say, oh, you're not meditating. You know what's going on. And no, I would know what's going on around me. And I started to visualize. I didn't open my eyes. I don't know. I could do a closed eyes meditation. I started to visualize that I was surrounded by an enormous number of people. And I visualized them as being, about 30 feet away. And making a circle all the way around me. This is what I was getting this idea, but I wasn't going to look. And then I finished my meditation and I opened my eyes and that's what was there.
Whoa, yes, that would have been a trip.
It didn't faze me. It doesn't faze me because I know these people are curious. This is Yugoslavia, if you could understand.
Like, that guy's been sitting there for an hour.
After that, after having that training with those kids, nothing better than that. Mm-hmm. I could meditate anywhere, and eventually I was just falling into samadhi instantaneously when I would go into meditation. Mm-hmm. And it was just, and I heard Nishila Devi says you can't know when you're samadhi. No, there are various levels of samadhi. If you look at the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, there are so many different levels of samadhi. So anything that's lower than Nirbija Samadhi, you can certainly know, So I would just fall into samadhi instantaneously the moment I sat up for meditation. And I was doing that for quite a long time and twice a day. And it wasn't always that I'd fall. Sometimes might be a little disturbed or something like that, but most of the time. And so that was.
Is that how you coach? Is that where you are when you meet Desichackar, or did you meet Desichackar in the mix there?
Oh, no, far later. Yeah. And so early on in my meditation, I remember Kali, I think her name was Kali Ray. She said that she did instantaneous yoga dance. And I met her through Leslie Kamenoff at a retreat we did upstate. And Kali Ray was there, and I rode back with her. And that's how she introduced me to Ananda Ashram. And I remember she was doing this yoga dance thing. And she said spontaneous yoga dance would happen for her. And so that was a very interesting thing for me, because when I was sitting in meditation early on, I remembered about that girl telling me to do ballet. And not that she told me to do it, but she suggested it to me. And she didn't even suggest it. It's just something weird that she said. And so I was sitting in meditation. I just was like, I've got to dance. I have got to do this. So I started taking ballet classes, and that became like a big deal for me. So my life was, at a certain point, my life became ballet and yoga and meditation. And I have no regrets. It's ridiculous to say it, but I don't think there's anything higher than that, And of course, people have all kinds of beautiful lives,
When did you get to New York?
Okay, I was doing ballet in Chicago, and then I took a trip to New York, and I met Richard Gibson in a ballet class. And I asked him if he would give me a scholarship, because he said, I'm not going to teach here anymore. He said, I'm going to, and I was in New York just for a short time. And he said, I'm going to teach in California. I'm opening up a school. And I said, well, can I have a scholarship with you? And he said, yes, you can. And so I went to California, and I lived in California for a while. And then at some point, Richard Gibson said, oh, I'm done with you. I'm not going to have you on scholarship anymore. And at that point, I said, okay, then what am I going to do? And not a lot of people, but some of the dancers were going off to Europe. And they were talking about, you could get a job in Europe. So I went to, and there was something going on in Iceland. So I wanted to go through Iceland. So I went through Iceland to Europe, and that's it. I lived in Europe for several years. And while I was in Europe, I didn't know anything about Desichackar or anything like that. I was just doing my meditations, and I was doing ballet. And the two worlds had not merged yet. The people are different, but some people were in the yoga communities thought that ballet and dance was just, low life. Mm. But most of them, especially a lot of the teachers and I was with a lot of monks and stuff like that, and they were praising it. I mean, they just thought that was just the greatest thing, Mm-hmm. But there were people who gave me flack about it. And then in the ballet world, they just thought that yoga was stupid.
It was just stretching anyways, and we do that already. And ballet people could do all the poses pretty easily because they had all this flexibility and strength from their training, you know?
Yeah, so the two worlds hadn't merged yet. I think that changed, you know?
Interesting.
But at that time, they were two different worlds. But for me, it was a merging of two worlds that was just incredible. You know, I mean, I think some of the reason I was able to sit in samadhi so easily was because of my ballet. So, and then, you know, so one was feeding the other. You know, like my meditations were feeding the way I danced, you know, and the way I felt in dance. And then the dance was making it more possible. So I had this really super disciplined life, which I don't have today. I almost want to go back.
Well, at that time, there was no internet. Let's be clear. That's why I'm trying to get like a frame of when, because I started talking to you today about like seeing a card of yours in 2003 or whatever at the Breathing Project. So I'm kind of wondering how you ended up getting from Chicago, and you said you were in Europe for a while, and then the ballet and the yoga merge. When do you get to New York? When do you meet Desichackar?
So I was in France. I lived in Paris. And so I had been speaking French. I was living in Paris, and I just adored it. And then at some point, and there was a fantastic ballet teacher out there. It was just incredible. And we used to have some of the most powerful ballet dancers would come to this class. And I was just, you know, just drooling over this, you know, because I would be able to dance with them, you know. And I mean, there's the Paris Opera and things. They took class there, and major dancers from all over the world, when they're in Paris, that's the class they went to. And so it was a major powerhouse class. It was way above my head in that way. You know, I wasn't a major powerhouse like that, but I became more because of it. You know, it really gave me a power to be in that presence. So I was in Europe for so many years, and then I thought, you know what? I think it's time for me to go back to America. I just started craving for some reason. I don't know. And so I started craving to be back in America. That's all I remember. And I thought, okay, well, where do you go as a ballet dancer? You go to New York. There is no other place. There are other places, but the main thing is New York. Every dancer dreams about being in New York. So I went to New York, and then I was teaching. There's also important, you might want to know, I was teaching Pilates after a while. I was in New York. I joined the Empire State Ballet, and I hated it. The way we were treated, the way this woman who ran that ballet acted, and she couldn't dance, and she was the choreographer and ran everything, and she was all stressed out, and she treated us like lousy. She slapped me across the face once for just, I didn't say anything. I mean, I didn't say anything wrong. I didn't know I said anything wrong. And it just insulted her. And I didn't know. Oh yeah. I mean, the thing was, my costume had torn. Okay. This is the way the woman was, you know, my costume had torn. She had just sewn it together. And I don't even know that I kind of know that she's sewing the costumes together, but I'm not paying that much attention. She had just sewn these costumes together. And first thing I did, I was dancing in the costume and it tore. And I went up to her and I said, "Oh, the costume tore." And she says, "Oh, you. It would be you." And I'm like, well, you know, so I was just giving an explanation, and I said, well, it just wasn't sewn strong enough, which was true. The seam was not strong enough, right? It was very weakly sewn. It was just tacked together. She may have forgotten to sew it. Who knows? But I said it wasn't sewn strong enough, and she took that as an insult. And she just took her big fat hand.
But that's why people look down on ballet, I think, sometimes, because ballet was often not really about like people's health so much as like fulfilling the choreography of the the director who sometimes was an asshole like that,
Oh yeah, that was filled. I mean, I had that in Europe too, so I was like done.
Yeah.
And so when she slapped me across the face, I was done. So I was taking ballet class with David Howard because I liked his class, and then I'd studied Laban. I thought I'd mention that because
I talked with Amy Matthews about that technique.
I was in the Laban school.
Okay.
I was in New York. I went to New York University, and then Laban was part of it. And then I was also with Bernard. Who was it that the one that Carl Horowitz said that his wife sent him to?
Yes.
So I had studied with him at New York University, and then I went to the Laban Institute, was part of New York University. And one of the most beautiful things I can share with your people here, everyone listening, is and not everybody understands this. So I'll do my best. But I walked into the Laban studio one day, and in the big room, there was a banner that somebody had put up, and it said, "Have you made a good mistake today?" And that's a moment of life changing, when I saw that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you made a good mistake today? Oh, I thought, oh my gosh, what a shift of perspective. Because we're always so afraid to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Or even the idea of a good mistake,
Yeah, because, you ever make a mistake and it turns out to be the right thing?
Or you learn shit from mistakes, and that's often important, as cliche as that might sound. It's true.
You're in town and you're looking for something and you're thinking, well, okay, I should go straight ahead. It's that way. And you take a right turn into a mistake. And your wife says, why did you take a right turn? I told you to go straight. No, I thought you meant right. I went, oh, but there it is. That's what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
You make a mistake and then exactly what you're looking for. In fact, sometimes mistakes really are just, just your direction in disguise.
Yeah, it was life interceding or higher forces, if you believe in them. Sometimes they say, you're going to go this way. Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about
listen,
that.
I want to know about Desichackar because one of my big things is people who met him, because I didn't really get to meet him. So when you meet him?
I was in New York. I did the New York University thing for a little while, and then I just thought I'd let you know about Laban and all that kind of stuff. And then I took integral yoga teacher training. Okay. I was teaching Pilates. This is probably an important part of the sequence. I was in Pilates. I was teaching because I quit being. I no longer wanted to make money dancing. I still wanted to do ballet. So I was taking class with David Howard, and I was doing free things. I was doing improvisation and things like that with jazz bands and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I was still involved with dance, but I had made a decision, no more money. I refused to take money for dancing. And so I was going to make money somehow else. So I started teaching Pilates. So that's important because of Pilates. And back in those days, nobody knew what Pilates was. So if you can kind of get a picture of where I was. And the only people who came to Pilates was dancers.
Right? Yeah.
And wealthy people who knew about it.
Interesting.
And so I was in the original Pilates studio where Joe Pilates they were his direct descendants, and so that was pretty interesting. And then I taught for Carola Trier. I started teaching Pilates, and I taught for Carola Trier after that. And Carola Trier was a direct descendant of Pilates. She's a pretty interesting lady, but it was all injuries. So when I was working with Carola Trier, it was all injured people. And that was really interesting. And then I went back to the original studio, and I was hanging out with some of the teachers there, and they were always bitching, and one of their biggest bitches was, oh, I don't want to be pushing people's bodies for the rest of my life, because that's what you do in these Pilates studios. You kind of push people around or help, or they're on springs and all this kind of stuff. And you're kind of like helping, you might push the spring to make it lighter, whatever, you're pushing bodies. And so they called it pushing bodies. I don't know. I need pushing bodies 20 years from now. I don't need pushing bodies. And they were always bitching. And I was like, I wasn't that way. So a light went off in me, and I thought, I'm teaching Pilates. There's nothing here for the mind. this is not satisfying. And yoga is. Yoga completely satisfies.
Because it's got the meditation component that you were so into before, you know?
The whole yoga thing. And so I thought, why am I teaching Pilates? Because there's some money in it, you know, yoga, nobody was making money. And I was, you know, everyone at that time said, no one makes money teaching yoga. But I said, I don't care. I'm going to go teach yoga. So I went to the Integral Yoga Institute, and I had Ashokananda was my teacher there. It's really good. And it was a good program. And then I was teaching there. And then I was topping my class, you know, because and Ashokananda told me, he said, you know, topping my class is just nonsense, you know, but I mean, I was good. And so Ashokananda said, there was rules about teaching there. You had to teach a certain way. It had to be this and this. And I had a talk with Ashokananda. He was kind of running the place at that time. And he said, you can break the rules because you know enough. He goes, you know a lot. You know other things. If you want to bring something else into your class, you can do it. So I was teaching, and I had a big class. It was really popular class. And there was a guy that I liked a lot that was my teacher, even before training, I think, you know. And I went up and talked to him. And I said, you know, I really want to teach more. I want to get into this more. And he said, oh, if you want to teach more and you want to go deep into it, you've got to go hang out with Leslie Kaminoff and his crowd. So I said, oh, okay. So I went off to see Leslie Kaminoff. And that was pretty cool. And he started talking about Desichackar and that Gary Kraftsall was coming and all these things. So that was my connection.
All right. So you met Leslie. That's interesting. And so you got a Desichackar. So when's the first time you met Desichackar?
Well, I think this is getting to the late 90s, maybe. Late 80s. And I don't know, Leslie had done a workshop with Desichackar, and then he was saying, you've got to meet Desichackar. And then I think it was 1990 that Desichackar was coming next. And so I went up to Hamilton University and did a workshop with, I guess it was 15 people with Desichackar. I think it was 15. You know, Leslie Kaminoff was there, and some of the, you know, Desichackar students from around the country and stuff were there. And so that was my first meeting with Desichackar.
And what was your impression of him?
I was impressed. And I mean, I got to admit that a lot of my impression was due to Leslie, because he's really good at that.
He was singing his praises. I know. He still to this day does it. And so do I, for the record, you know?
So he's really good at that. So I was really impressed, probably due to Leslie a lot. But I mean, you know, Leslie was just like, this is the guy, you know, and blah, 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 blah. And we talked about it for so many times and heard so much about it before I met him. But yeah, you know, he made an impression. We did the Tai Chi Upanishad, in fact, back in those days, which was really a supercharge for me. And it still is right now. And so, you know, I really got a connection with that. And then Desichackar taught me a practice later on that he never made a connection, but I realized that's what he was talking about back in 1990. And so there were certain pranayamas he taught in 1990 that he didn't teach me when he gave me the practice, but I made the connection. And I realized, oh, this meditation practice, that pranayama that he taught us in 1990, that was for this practice. And he's not telling me now. Why is he not telling me now? He taught us in 1990. And so I started doing that pranayama the way he taught it in 1990. And it finally made sense. And then I was able to do it because I remember when 1990, Desichackar taught this pranayama. And he said,
which pranayama? We're talking about alternate nostril breathing, or what do you say pranayama is like a specific ratio of breath, or what was it?
Yeah. It was two long form Gayatri mantras.
Okay.
On inhale and hold two long Gayatri mantras on holding the breath, and then exhale 2 long Gayatri mantras.
And is your mantra practice, I'm sorry to interrupt again, is your mantra practice always been like internal recantation or incantation, or do you do chanting as well? Do you chant mantras out loud?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I love chanting out loud.
Yeah.
Om iti Brahma, Om iti Dagum Sarvam, Om iti Tadanukriti Hasmava Apyo Shravayetya Shravayenti, Om iti Samani Gayanti, Ogum Shom iti Shastrani Shagum Santi, Om iti Brahma Prasauti, Om Mityagnihotra Manujanati, Om iti Brahmana Pravakshana, Brahmopa Apnavaniti, Brahmaivopa Apnoti.
Om, wow. Old school. See, the only time I ever met Desichackar was for a chanting workshop of sorts. Like it was a big room of people, but we chanted. That's all we did with him. So interesting. So did Desichackar change how you taught yoga?
No, I didn't pay any attention to him. I just went on doing my old stuff.
I see. So because I only asked that because there are some specific things about the way that he taught asana and pranayama, like in terms of ujjayi being like a central feature, or even the breath pattern, like Leslie talks about that, like an integral, they might have like a 3-part breathing or like a belly breathing thing, but Desichakar's got that inhale from above, exhale from below kind of breath pattern. Like to me, there was something distinct about the way that Desichackar was teaching asana and pranayama from like other approaches. But it seems like you were kind of in the mish in before, so maybe it wasn't as kind of clarified in your case. I don't know.
No, I was kidding. I changed everything.
You got me. You did that too straight. I'm usually pretty quick on the draw, but I didn't catch that. That's funny. That's good.
That's been one of my problems throughout life, is that I joke around and people think I'm serious, and then I get in really serious trouble sometimes.
I mean, I know some straight players over the years, man, but you just took the cake.
I got really good at it, and I could really get in trouble. I mean, serious trouble, because I used to say really stupid things years ago, when I was in New York or something. I could say really stupid things, and people would think I was serious. And I was not serious at all, and they would hate me for the rest of my life,
See, interesting. All right, well, so Desichackar changed things. How so? Say something about that.
Oh, you need clarification on that? I thought you've studied these things.
I mean, I have, but not everybody listening knows everything. I mean, I like to hear how it went for you. You want to know why? Because I know a lot of people, and as you've seen in the archive of this show, I've talked to a lot of people who had a chance to kind of study more directly with Desichackar, or were influenced by him or inspired by him. And people, like the way that what he was teaching comes through different people, or the way that it played out for them is very individual, because that was what he taught, right? It's an individualized approach. So I'm just curious, how did it play out for you? Coming from this background of ballet and Pilates, and even coming up against like the commercialization of things, and like, oh, I don't want to make money at it anymore because my heart isn't it, because it serves something deep in me, which is why you did meditations for hours and Yugoslavia or whatever, right? So what is it about yoga and Desichackar that comes together for you?
Yeah, that's why I was looking forward to your podcast, because you're like the Phil Donahue, and you bring
you dated
out.
us. A lot of people listening to this might not know who Phil Donahue is, but I remember him from when I was a kid in the 80s.
Well, he is probably one of the most fantastic interviewers ever,
Yeah, who got canceled, actually, speaking of which. Anyways, but let's not go there.
Which shows how good he was.
Yeah.
And so I was doing those meditations, and I noticed that I was just in what you could call bliss, I guess. I was just, dude, this is the best time this is nothing better than that. And then I would come out of the meditation and everything would come back again,
Yeah.
And it would take a little bit of time, but slowly everything comes back. And then I noticed that I started getting really spaced out. And it was kind of, not that I wasn't spaced out before, but I started feeling spaced out during the day. When I was meditating, I was supercharged.
Mm-hmm.
But just during normal events during the day, I was kind of like spaced out. And I started thinking something's not right here. Something's not right. And so when I got introduced to Desicachar's work, and maybe it was through, I don't know, Leslie or Gary, I didn't spend an enormous time with Gary, but he was a big influence on me because he was brilliant.
Yeah.
And so I started to realize that I had to integrate an asana practice, had to integrate into my meditation, that the whole thing had to integrate, that I couldn't, that's how I was going to get over this spaced out feeling. That's what I thought. That was my belief.
If I could just stop you for a second, I want to kind of put a note on that, because that is exactly what sort of brought me to Desicachar too. Similarly, I was doing all this like seated meditation and having this experience of like in the meditations feeling very blissful and like this oneness and everything. But outside of the meditation, my life was totally fucked up and I had no like relationships and I was lonely and miserable. And so Desicachar and Mark, you referenced him, were the influences that were all about, oh no, you have to have a life and whatever you're doing in practice is going to integrate you into your life. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. So I guess that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized that there was no other, no asana wasn't helping. I mean, I had the ballet world too. I wasn't spaced out in ballet, but now you're talking about post ballet world and all that too. Mm-hmm. So I started thinking, Desicachar made a lot of sense to me. I started thinking it's possible that I needed to integrate the whole thing, mm-hmm. and that's what it was. Maybe you're supposed to get that integral yoga, but I wasn't really getting that integration yet.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you start to do an integration process of kind of not just removing yourself through meditation, but like trying to be in your life without spacing out. So when do you open a yoga center in New York City is what I'm trying to say. Because if you had a center that Carl was teaching at some point you kind of like set up a shop, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of like, I don't do things in a big way. And then, Desicachar's thing was, well, teach privately and all that. And,
right. See, that's what I said at the beginning. Desicachar was always you teaching privately, but you couldn't make a living always teaching privately unless you had like a couple of rich clients, which sometimes was the deal, Oh,
I had some of those. Yeah.
I see.
I even pushed some of them away. I had a really wealthy fellow who was just kind of goofy. Mm. And if he acted up too much, I would just kind of like, I wouldn't be available for him. And then he would wonder, like months later, he would finally get an appointment with me. He goes, why won't you work with, and all this, and I would realize that sometimes people just don't understand what you're doing. I thought he might understand that, I took a break from him because of his behavior, Mm. But, I had one guy that was so wealthy, he never took a class with me. He just paid me.
What? But you see, I feel like this is the time when I first came across your name, when you were teaching privately. Like maybe I came across it earlier.
I was doing both. I was always kind of doing both, But this guy was funny. He was an Indian fellow who did the stock market, okay. And he made he lived nearby me on the Upper East Side, and if you go up there in the 70s, there's this really tall building on the waterfront, and it's massive. It's huge. It's one of the tallest buildings there. He owned the whole top floor. Mm. And And he was awake for the noon stock market exchange. He was awake for the Japanese stock market exchange. He was waiting for the Delhi stock market exchange, and so he was awake all the time. And I thought, oh my God, what a life, because he only gets to sleep like 3 hours at a time. And so he would make these appointments with me, and then he would always cancel, and he would pay me,
But it's interesting because I think maybe a lot of folks wouldn't know this if you weren't around at that time. I caught the tail end of it, but when yoga did start to become like more popular and there was like a lot of yoga centers opening up, there was like a boom in private yoga as well. Because I remember there was one year like Vogue magazine, like hippest things of the year. One of the top hippest things of the year was to have a private yoga instructor. And I was getting calls. I was getting random calls from people wanting private yoga instruction, which you could charge a premium for. So there was like a heyday of that. I don't know if that's still true today. Probably not like it was.
I kind of figured it probably has died out, huh?
Maybe. But
to a certain extent.
Yeah. Were you able to like pay your way as a yoga teacher?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you could do it. And you could maybe get an apartment that wasn't too crazy back then too, in terms of rent.
Yeah, when I got my apartment, the rents were a little bit low, and then they started jetting up. Yeah. So I had a pretty good deal on my apartment. And that's where I taught. I just taught out of my apartment, so I wouldn't have any expenses. I didn't want this, like Jiva Mukti, they moved over to that big studio, and then I talked to David, and he said, yeah, it's $22,000 a month.
Oh my God, that place on Lafayette, you mean, or on Union Square? Yeah. Maybe the Union Square space.
Yeah.
Crazy. I know, but they didn't last. There's no Jiva Mukti in New York City. Isn't that crazy? If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.